lastly, we must always avoid the blame game. All right? So, we're going to move on now to the history part of today's History Live. And as usual, I'm going to read from this book first, which is called Immigration into the West Indies in the 19th Century by K.O. Lawrence. All right, I am going to continue reading from section 8 of the book. And I'm going to speak about, just to give a little context, this book deals with, after emancipation, the labor situation in Trinidad, as well as Jamaica, Guyana, and Surinam, and what took place with indentureship and other substitute forms of labor for the Africans who the plantation owners refused to pay a proper wage even after the period of apprenticeship. All right, so I'm going to read now. Apart from the fact that bounties were offered to induce those whose indentures expired to enter new ones, and that these were widely accepted until the late 1870s in the British colonies and the 1880s in the French, many Indians simply omitted to take advantage of the offer of a free return passage. Others commuted their entitlement for grants of money or land. In consequence, only a small proportion of the indentured immigrants ever returned to India, normally between 1/4 and 1/3, as the following table shows. All right, it shows here the amount of East Indians that arrived in British Guyana was 238,909, and 75,547 returned. Of those in Trinidad, 143,939 indentures came, and 33,294 returned. In Jamaica, 36,412 indentures arrived from India, 11,880 returned. In Martinique, 25,519 indentures arrived, only 5,000 returned. In Guadeloupe, 45,000 arrived and only 8,000 returned. In Surinam, 34,304 arrived and 11,559 returned. In the Windward Islands, 10,020 arrived and 3,074 returned. All right, in terms of proportion, the indentures who came from India, in British Guyana, only 31% returned. In Trinidad, only 22.37% returned. In Jamaica, 32% returned. In Martinique, 20% returned. In Guadeloupe, 18% returned. In Suriname, 33% returned. And in the Windward Islands, 37% returned. All right, so between Guadeloupe, Martinique, and Trinidad, we had the least amount of Indian indentures returning to India at the end of their contract. All right. In the British Island and in Suriname, the system of free return passage worked smoothly, and the pledge was regularly honored, except that during the 1850s, Jamaica had to be pressed into observing it by the colonial office. In the French island, difficulties arose, particularly since the man who chose to remain as a free laborer when his indenture expired lost his right to return passage, while the man who accepted a bounty to re-indenture retained it. In later years, French colonial authorities, despite some metropolitan opposition, came to regard the re-indented bounty as cancelling the right to a return passage. And so, as a disguised commutation payment, further, the authorities of Martinique and Guadeloupe frequently failed to provide return ship for years on end, and so exerted a strong and unfair pressure on the Indians to settle permanently. The local immigration bureau were guilty of, at best, great negligence in this matter, despite pressure from France, with the result that the proportion of immigrants returning from the French colonies was of the smallest of all. Despite the appointment in 1885 of a special commissioner for immigration, whose duties included the provision of return passages, there is no doubt that at least some hundreds of Indians who wished to return to India were forced to make the French colonies their permanent home when the last return ship sailed in 1906. Subsequent pressure from the British government on their behalf achieved nothing. Many of those who returned to India were of course drawn from among the less successful who had little to lose by returning, and there was also a regular flow of indigents repatriated by the colonial government before their indentures expired. But there were also many who returned with considerable sums of money and much jewelry. As earlier as the 1816, Indians who returned from Trinidad and British Guyana transferred an average of $120 each, and a few transferred very large sums, even exceeding $3,000. While substantial remittances to India were regularly made, to the point of being attacked by some Frenchmen as a financial drain, those who saved the large sums were of course those who had adopted some form of trade or business, either to supplement or to replace agricultural labor, and those who spent several years in the West Indies retail trade and the production of livestock or vegetables were regular and common sources of significant saving. All right, and that ends my reading from Immigration into the West Indies. I'm now going to read from Cedulants and Capitulants. All right, to give context, again, these were based on lectures that were given in the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies by Professor Carl C. Campbell, who was the senior lecturer in history. All right, this book speaks of the Cedulants and Capitulants. The subtitle is The Politics of the Colored Opposition in the Slave Society of Trinidad between 1783 and 1838. The colored people spoken about in this book would have been descendants of Moors and Spaniards, Moors and Portuguese, and Africans and French people mixed. So they were in fact mainly what we call today mulattoes. All right, they were called different things during different points in the historical records, but for our understanding in today's modern English, they are referred to as being biracial or mulattoes. All right, and I'm going to continue reading from this book. All right, Cedulants and Capitulants, from the section that deals with the subject of resistance without violence. Because the first appeal was to the British government and not to the local authorities, there was no need to ask for redress in a piecemeal fashion. With the British government, there was no need to bargain, to ask for little and expect less, or to accept a new privilege while agreeing to some new disability. The 1823 petition of the free coloreds to the British government was a full exposition of their grievances and a direct request for full civil equality. It was followed closely by an even fuller revelation of their agonies in the form of a book. The book was called Free Mulatto, written by a free colored leader, Dr. Joseph Baptiste Philip. The absence of an elected assembly also helped to shape the nature of the collective resistance. There was no need to lobby members of the council, no opportunity to attempt to shape the opinion in the council by public agitation. All that was necessary was the collection of sufficient names on a petition to impress the metropolitan government and ability to win a sympathetic hearing at the colonial office or in Parliament by the use of contact men in England or the dispatch of special delegates from the colony. It is not that signature could be obtained without raising the level of consciousness of grievances, but the emphasis was on the appeal to the external authority, not on internal agitation to influence the local authorities. It was not until after 1825